Still more rumors circulate about the Vancouver Canucks and possible trades. The Minnesota Wild find themselves at a crossroads due to injuries, and the Buffalo Sabres look to figure things out for the second half. We've got all that and more on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts so you get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. It's my pleasure to welcome back to the show the co-host of Locked On Canucks, Trevor Beggs. And Trevor, it's not dull following the Vancouver Canucks right now, but more trade rumors, more rumors of players who aren't getting along, who may not want to be there. What's going on in Vancouver?
I don't get it, Gil. Vancouver is one of the most beautiful cities in the world.
Yes.
Who wouldn't want to live here, man? Come
Yes.
on. I had one day, this is a few years back, where I was going to go snowboarding, and then instead we went to the beach instead. Like, how many places in the world can you do that? Why is everyone so upset being in Vancouver? But like you alluded to, it's, rumors coming out of the yin-yang here. And, it is a hockey hotbed, and a lot of the insiders are glued into Vancouver. And, again, all the reports of feud and tension and trade rumors. I mean, it's been a tumultuous season here for sure. And of course, Elliot Friedman reporting that, Miller maybe wasn't going to play against the Oilers on Saturday. He does play, picks up a couple assists, gets line match against McDavid, and actually has a pretty good game overall. Brock Boeser has commented on his own, the possibility of him being traded. Elias Pettersson apparently wants to stay. But again, we got a pretty bold management team here in Patrick Oviedo and Jim Rutherford. So unless this team turns it around, and I'm not necessarily buying it after one win against the Edmonton Oilers at the end of the road trip, I really do think anything's on the table right now.
Talk to me about that game against the Oilers. Connor McDavid, a little questionable hit there. What happened, and do you expect that there will be a possible suspension here?
I get the sense that there's going to be a suspension because I already think there's some heat on McDavid, right? He gets fined, pennies according to what he makes annually for the elbow on Marcus Johansson there. But I mean, I'm a big Connor Garland fan, and he definitely, for being the smallest forward on paper in the NHL, he does a hell of a job of getting under guys' skin. And, Ray Ferraro said it correctly on the Hockey Day in Canada broadcast up here in Canada. That Garland probably could have gotten called for 3 penalties on that play, like leg locking McDavid and interfering with him. But that doesn't really excuse you to cross-check a guy in the face. So I know I see some old hockey meatheads saying like, there's something wrong with it. Let him do it. Sure, let him do it, but I think he should be suspended for it. And of course, Tyler Myers should probably be suspended too. I mean, he cross-checked Bouchard in the face away from the play. Not as much attention on that, but both plays were pretty much identical. I'm really curious to see if they actually have the cojones to suspend McDavid. If they don't, it's a little bit like Patrick Mahomes in the NFL, right? We all saw, or for those who follow the NFL, we saw him get some preferential treatment over the weekend as well. So, I honestly, I'm leaning toward the NHL suspending McDavid. I think they will do it. But if they don't, I think that certainly says something about stars getting preferential treatment.
This team right now is on the outside looking in as far as the playoffs are concerned. What do they need to do most to get back to playing consistent hockey and righting the ship? And is it as simple as can't they all just get along?
Yeah, that would be the easiest thing, Gil, honestly. And, I just stepping aside from that, I think just JT Miller and Elias Pettersson at the top of the lineup. I did see a stat today that Quinn Hughes is on pace for 100 points. We all know that. He's having a Hart Trophy-like season. They are wasting a legendary season from Quinn Hughes here. I mean, he gets 2 of the Canucks' 3 goals last night, including the game winner. He is the heart and soul of the Vancouver Canucks. But this team, when they were successful last year, when they were a Stanley Cup contender, when they were one of the best teams in the league, it was Miller, it was Pettersson, it was Boeser, it was Demko, it was Hronek, it was Hughes. And this year, it really only seems like it's Hughes. Now, granted, Demko and Hronek have dealt with injuries. Boeser's dealt with injury a little bit as well. But, really, I think it falls on Miller and Pettersson right now. I mean, those guys are both on pace, I believe, for less than 60 points. I think over an 82-game stretch, they'd be on pace for more. But these are players who have hit 100 points recently in the NHL. You're paying these guys a lot of money, and if they are going to be second liners instead of superstars, then this Canucks team is not going to make much noise. Now, I do hold out some hope that they can turn things around in some way, shape, or form. Maybe it's just my stubborn Canuck fan belief, but it's worked with these guys on the team before. So I do have a hard time believing that, it's just all dead in the water now and that the window's closed. But that being said, I mean, we're pretty much pushing a full calendar year of Pettersson looking like a second liner instead of a superstar. JT Miller has not looked right all season long. He's scored on an NHL goalie once since October. That's a crazy stat. I mean, it happened twice in the same game on Sam Montembeault in Montreal. But he just has not scored at all. His last goal, aside from scoring on Sam Montembeault here in January, was on October 26th on Tristan Jarry, who is not even with the Pittsburgh Penguins anymore. So It really just started with the superstars. This team does need another defenseman. It is a brutal defense core aside from Hughes and Hronek. So I don't know if trading one of the stars is the answer to make that happen. But long term, this team, even if Miller and Pettersson turn it around, I don't think they're competing for a Stanley Cup unless they add another defenseman.
Let's talk a little bit about some good news. How about Jake DeBrusk? He's leading the team in goals. Give me something happy here.
Oh man, I mean, he is leading the team in goals, and I'll pat myself on the back a little bit because that was one of my preseason predictions on Locked On Canucks, is that Jake DeBrusk and not Brock Boeser would lead the team in scoring. Now, with Jake DeBrusk, though, he has been hot and cold, and he's gone a bit cold right now. And, again, in terms of our listeners and the comments we get on the show, so much vitriol towards Elias Pettersson. But right now he is on a line with Jake DeBrusk and Brock Boeser. And those guys, I believe, especially if you watch, the Edmonton game over again, Pettersson was making things happen along the boards. This defensive game was there, but I think Boeser and DeBrusk are kind of letting him down a bit right now. And Jake DeBrusk, again, having a good season. And Gil, I'm feeling so negative right now, but Jake DeBrusk only has 1 goal and one assist over his last 10 games. He was running really hot there in November and December, but he's definitely cooled down a bit. But this has been Jake DeBrusk throughout his whole NHL career, right? Really nice to see him again on pace for 30 plus goals, 50 plus points. He's doing everything that you ask for a guy making 5.5, but the inconsistencies and how he can be a goal per game for a 10-game stretch and then have 2 points in 10 games. I mean, that has followed him to Vancouver here.
What do you expect this team to do at the trade deadline? It's 6 weeks away. You got like 10 days off in the middle for the Four Nations tournament. There's so many possibilities here. What do you think they need to do, and what do you think they will do?
That's a tough question, Gil, honestly. And it depends how the team performs. I think Albion and Rutherford in the past, if the team is playing well, they've rewarded the team for their good performance. But we just haven't seen that form yet this season. I mean, they've been blown out on numerous occasions. Aside from Edmonton last night, they've started slow in almost every one of their games. It is hard to envision Albion and Rutherford making a big deal to add to this team right now. It does feel right now, if they make a big deal, it's trading Miller or Boeser, and I think what's less likely is trading Elias Pettersson. And Brock Boeser right now, and he talked to Ian McIntyre from Sportsnet a couple of days ago, and he said that he could see how he would be an easy guy to trade as a UFA. And it's a big question for the Vancouver Canucks, because if this team isn't contending for a Stanley Cup, and they do need a bit of a retool, it's fair to wonder if the Canucks should go out and pay Brock Boeser $8+ million per season. Again, you look at his player value according to The Athletic, he's valued right around a $6.5 million player, which is what he's making in Vancouver. So is Brock Boeser the guy that gets you a top 4 defenseman? Do you re-sign him? I think that is, aside from figuring out this whole Miller Pettersson thing and what to do with those guys, figuring out what to do with Brock Boeser is a massive decision for the Vancouver Canucks.
This is a team and a franchise at a crossroads right now. I know it's going to be a very interesting second half of the season. Trevor, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
You know what? Sports is all about escapism, Gil. You know, that's why we're doing this. Locked on NHL, Locked on Islanders, Locked on Canucks, and by God, if you're having a bad day or you need some escapism, tune into Locked on Canucks because it's never a dull moment in Vancouver,
That's
like you
right.
said. And a lot of people like to just laugh at the Vancouver Canucks, and we like to. If you want to hear a couple of angry Canuck fans talking about the dysfunction of their team, my co-host Kyle and I, we got you covered on Locked on Canucks. But yeah, you can find Locked on Canucks on YouTube, wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find me on Twitter at Trev Beggs. You can find my co-host Kyle Bowen on Instagram at Kyle Bowen, Bhawan.
All right, Trevor, thanks so much. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NHL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win that first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keeps every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. And hockey fans, you can also use your knowledge of hockey and your favorite team to find exciting betting opportunities on FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show a familiar face and voice for Locked On NHL fans, Seth Toupal of Locked On Wild. And Seth, a little bump in the road here for the Wild. They've lost 3 straight. They lose a fight-filled game over the weekend. What's been causing their struggles as of late?
Well, thankfully, I can pretty much succinctly pin it down on one thing, that being the injuries. And that was a big reason that the game against the Predators was filled with as many fights as it was, is because Zach LaRue double slew-footed, not just a single slew foot, a double slew foot that knocked Jared Spurgeon out of the lineup. And so obviously the Wild have been frustrated about that for a long time. It's the injuries. I mean, I challenge any other team in the league to take a Hart Trophy contender and your top 3 defensemen out of the lineup and continue to win at the pace that you have been throughout the start of the season. So it's been rough, and it's not only those guys, but the Wild at one point this year were without Kirill Kaprizov, Jake Middleton, who's in the midst of a career year defensively and offensively, Brock Faber, Jared Spurgeon, Jonas Brodin. Like, they are just a mash unit at this point in the season. And the hope is that this team has done enough, especially early on in the season, to keep themselves in a playoff spot until these players come back, and that they'll be able to get back to maybe not that same level of winning at the beginning of the year, but something similar to that. Because they were, before the injuries started to hit, they were one of the best teams in the NHL, and it's not just like, at some point you just have to dismiss it as a fluke. Once they get those guys back, they're hoping to get to that same level again.
What's the timetable?
So Brock Faber returned to the lineup against Nashville. So that's a huge sigh of relief. And Jake Middleton missed about 3 weeks. He has come back within the last few games as well. It sounds like Kirill Kaprizov and Jared Spurgeon are very close. They practiced fully on Friday, but just did not make the trip. I think the team is trying to be overly cautious with bringing these guys back, just to make sure it hasn't been officially speculated, but I think we all pretty much know it's a groin injury for Kaprizov. Those can be pesky. So they're trying to be overly cautious to make sure that they don't rush him back. For Jared Spurgeon, I think when the injury initially happened, the fear was that he was going to be gone for the year because it looked ugly. But he practiced fully. By all accounts, he looks great. So I think hopefully by the end of the week, we should have those two guys back. And unfortunately, on the Jonas Brodin side of things, hasn't begun skating yet. He blocked a shot at the end of the game against the St. Louis Blues after he played like 33 minutes in that game and was just like one of the better games he's ever had. And then he blocks a shot with his foot and he's out of the lineup. So that's just the luck that the Wild have this year, but it sounds like they'll get at least two of those guys back. And then at that point, they got Jakub Lauko back, who's been out of the lineup as well for quite a bit. Maybe not as notable of a piece as the others, but still he brings a physical presence in the bottom six that's been missing. So once they get all those guys back, it'll pretty much just be Brodin that is still out of the lineup. And then they can kind of try to get everybody back to where they've been and just try to kind of get the car going back nice and steady on the road again.
You know, the Wild have been very strong 5-on-5, but special teams, not so great. Talk to me about the struggles on special teams.
Well, it seems, thankfully, like the power play is starting to get a little bit of a pulse again. Matt Boldy scored a power play goal against the Predators, even though the Wild lost that game. And even though they have lost some of these recent games, the power play has done a much better job of being more of a consistent threat. Which it always sounds weird to say this, but I think there is something to it. I think with Kirill out of the lineup, it forces the rest of the lineup to see who's going to step up. So I think having that opportunity to have other players step into that top role on that power play unit, I think has helped lead to more options that can score. I think sometimes this team, when Kirill's in the lineup, they just, we don't want to get in the way. We want to let Kirill do his thing, and we don't want to take opportunities away from him, which I totally get. But at the same time, if you've got the puck, let it rip, let it fly. On the penalty kill side, I don't even know at this point. Like, it's been bad for probably 4 years. It was covered up a couple of seasons. One, the year a couple years ago where Philip Gustafsson was a Vezina candidate, he really covered up this penalty kill by simply making saves. It comes down to, not winning faceoffs on the kill, which leads to the other team being able to get set up in the zone. I think if you can win those initial faceoffs and send it back down, you force the other team to have to play from behind the whole time. There hasn't been consistent faceoff wins. The Wild haven't consistently pressed teams on the kill either. They kind of sit back and just wait for teams to shoot. And rebound control around the net, both by the defense and the forwards and the goalies, has not been great too. So you combine all of those things, and if it was just one of those factors that was an issue, you can work with that. But it seems like the fact that all of those have been major problems is just, it's like a leaky pipe where you've got a couple of spots that are leaking water. If you had just one, you could patch that up pretty well and you'd be fine. But the fact that there are 4 different spots that are consistently leaking, you plug 2, the other 2 are still going to give up the water. So it's one of those where it has been different schemes. They've had different personnel on those units. At the end of the day, I think you just need to go in with an understanding if we just got to go full out for these 2 minutes every time we're on the kill to make sure that the other team doesn't score.
Trade deadline is now about 6 weeks away, but of course there's that break in the middle for the Four Nations tournament. It's a competitive division right now. The Wild could finish anywhere in the top 4, more or less. What do you think their approach will be at the trade deadline?
Well, I think there are a couple of areas that the Wild could use an upgrade. Number one is second line. That wing spot has been a little bit of a black hole for the last couple of seasons, and there have been links to players such as Brock Boeser, obviously the Minnesota tie, and your guy, Gil, Brock Nelson, has been linked to the Minnesota Wild here for the last few weeks. So I think if they can find a way, you're going to need to have somebody broker, take most of that salary on. So if, let's just say Brock Nelson, for example, Prorated, I think he's making $6 million this year. So if you prorate it to like 4 for the rest of the season or whatever it ends up being, you might have to find a team to take on 60-75% of that salary. And then the Wild could take on the rest. And you plug somebody in like that on that second line. I think that really helps them out. The other spot that I'd like to see too is maybe a defenseman, maybe one defenseman to come in kind of on the cheap, but somebody who has NHL experience and can fill in more of like a little bit higher than a third line role, that could play, second pairing, maybe could fill in on the top pairing depending on injuries. I that's something that I have thought about over the last couple of weeks, especially, is if the Wild can get just a little bit of defense insurance. I think that would be good to explore too. But I get the sense with Kirill Kaprizov entering the final year of his deal next year, with how well this team started the season, that Bill Guerin is really looking to make a trade here if he can. Last year, we saw the Wild kind of broker some deals because they had a ton of space at the deadline. This year, they do not. So now he's just going to have to get somebody else to help out and do a solid. And the Wild have plenty of picks, plenty of prospects in the system that they could certainly dangle those to make all that happen.
All right. Well, Seth, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
You can follow the show at Lockdown Wild on all of your favorite social platforms, X, Instagram, Facebook. I think TikTok is back now, so you can go on TikTok too. So you can follow us all there. And of course, myself, you can follow at Seth, TOUPS. Pretty much all things sports and otherwise, if you want my opinions there, make sure to check me out on those platforms as well.
All right, Seth, thanks so much.
My pleasure.
Today's episode is brought to you by Select Quote. In sports, having a winning strategy is everything. It's how the best teams make it to the Super Bowl, the World Series, and the Stanley Cup. The same goes for life. Having a strategy like life insurance from Select Quote can protect your financial legacy and keep your family's future secure. Select Quote makes it easy to find the perfect life insurance policy. As one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience, they've helped over 2 million customers find $700 billion in coverage since 1985. What sets Select Quote apart is their personal touch. Unlike other brokers that offer one-size-fits-all policies, their licensed agents tailor coverage to fit your unique needs. If you're in good health, you might even qualify for same-day coverage of up to $5 million. No medical exam required, and it's more affordable than you think. You can get up to $1 million in coverage for as little as $20 a month. Get the right life insurance for you for less at selectquote.com/LockedOnNHL. Go to selectquote.com/LockedOnNHL today to get started. That's selectquote.com/LockedOnNHL. Select Quote, they shop, you save. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Sabres, Joe DiBiase. And Joe, Buffalo finding some new and different ways to lose hockey games on Friday night, dominate the shots on goal, give up a goal and an assist to the opposing goalie, and lose pretty handily. What's going on the ice? Because they can't seem to find consistency.
No, they're inventing not even just ways to lose. They're just inventing ways to finish a game. So they did dominate the Penguins. I mean, shot attempts and shots on goal and possession of the puck, like they were all over them. The Penguins have had a pretty down year, I would say, by their standards as well. They've only won 3 of 10. And the Sabres are all over them, and they find themselves down by 2, and you allowed Alex Nedeljkovic to score a goal from his own end of the ice after having an assist earlier in the game. So if you take the Sabre perspective of it, they're the first team in NHL history to allow a goaltender to have a goal and an assist on them in the same game. Even the previous game, Gil, on Wednesday, they became the first team ever to score a goal in a full 20-minute period in which they did not record a shot. They went 20 minutes against Carolina. They had a 3-goal lead. They almost blew it, which they've done a lot this year. It got to 3-2. They stayed on their heels. They almost allow Carolina back into the game, and Ryan McLeod with a breakaway down at the end on an empty net. He gets slashed from behind, so they give him the goal, but he doesn't get the shot. So, in back-to-back games, first team ever to not have a shot in a period but score, then first team to ever give up a goal and assist to a goaltender. I cannot wait to see what they have as their next trick up their sleeve for Monday night. That's going to be historic.
Yeah, pretty original. And yet, they're 5-4-1 in their last 10. So it's not like they're playing terrible hockey. What does this team need to do better if they hope to have a better record in the second half?
I mean, I think they have two. I mean, it's more than two, but if I were to pick their two biggest issues as a team right now, Gil, it is that they have a fatal flaw as a roster, and it's one that you really can't overcome, which is they just don't have natural born goal scorers on their team. Like, they will have games where they create, like Pittsburgh, we just mentioned, like they'll have games where they generate a lot of shots and a lot of scoring chances, but how many guys on your team do you have that are proven goal scorers in the NHL? Like Tage Thompson is that. He's done that really now 4 years in a row. Like, this year is not the 47 goal pace that he was on 2 seasons ago, but he's on an 82 game pace of 40 goals. So like Thompson's doing it, but everybody else behind that, like right now, Jason Zucker is your second leading scorer. And that's been a pleasant surprise, like veteran guy at 33 on a 1-year contract. But that says something about your offensive talent. If dude just walks in off the street on a 1-year deal, prove it deal, like, do you still have anything left in the tank? And he's your second leading goal scorer. They have young guys like JJ Peterka and Jack Quinn and Dylan Cousins, who I think were all thrust or trusted to be real goal scorers on this hockey team. Cousins had done it for 1 year. The other two had showed signs that they could be that, but none have really done it. And that to me is problem number one. You just don't have the talent. The talent is the problem. And then two, they cannot hold leads. Like, there's a mental weakness, I think, to this group where it is the way they seem to play. This is the way Lindy Ruff has talked about it a little bit, that as a group, they just seem to crack under the pressure. It's almost like they play expecting to lose a lead when they have it. It's because it's happened so many times. They had a 4-0 lead against Colorado that they blew. They lost that game in regulation. They had a 3-goal lead against Colorado again 2 weeks later that they lost in regulation. They had a 2-goal lead. I'm forgetting the opponents at this point. Maybe it was Toronto. Like, they've had multiple multi-goal leads that they've blown in like a month. So, I mean, they keep doing it. Of course they believe that they're going to blow leads. So those are the biggest two problems. But the problem with this team is those aren't the only two problems.
So, I mean, you're looking at a double-digit deficit right now for the playoffs. With the inconsistency, I would say it doesn't look likely. And based on your description of the two biggest problems this team has, changes are most likely necessary.
Mm-hmm.
We've heard rumors about Dylan Cousins possibly heading elsewhere.
Yep.
What do you expect this team to look to do at the trade deadline?
It's an interesting question, because I think you could almost splice that into what do we expect them to want to do and what do we expect them to actually do? Because with this team, this ownership group, and with this general manager, the proof is in the pudding that, one, they don't really like to make big swings. They want it to grow naturally. They kind of are, I think, gun shy to make big moves and to go on a limb and risk of getting criticized for overpaying for something. And two, I think when they might want to do things like that, they run into a lot of roadblocks in that they have a GM that didn't really have any managerial experience before this job. And I think that limits him in his ability to make big trades or to bring people in. And two, and I think this is 1000% deserved, I would be stunned if there is a no trade list in the National Hockey League, whether it's 2 teams or 10, that does not contain the Buffalo Sabres on them. Why would you want to play here? They have a market that loves the team, but they're so demoralized that the building's not full all the time. The organization isn't really, it's run to me like more of a mom and pop shop at this point. I mean, a lot of these players that are probably in their mid-20s were in elementary school the last time they saw this team in the playoffs. So, and they don't like to pay up big money. So like, possible reason could you believe that, okay, JT Miller, you want to go trade for JT Miller for Vancouver? Great. Go make the best offer. And I'm not going to believe JT Miller is going to want to come here. And I'm not going to believe at the outset they're even going to make the best offer. So it just feels like they're so far away from making that big swing that they need. So what will they end up doing? Maybe it's what you just mentioned, that Dylan Cousins, there were rumors about him in Detroit maybe being a match, that the Red Wings liked him and there could be a trade there. But Elliot Friedman said that kind of fell apart. He doesn't know where it stands. So like, that's kind of where you end up. They're kind of in no man's land where I don't expect them to want to or even be capable of landing the big fish that they need. And two, okay, you want to trade away Dylan Cousins? You want to trade away, you want to blow it up? You want to trade Tage Thompson away? What are you going to do? You're going to get picks and prospects back? Like, that doesn't fit with where you are as an organization. So it's tough. It's really, really tough solution to find for this hockey team right now.
So what is the solution? I mean, do you get a new general manager? Do you blow it up and like ask for more time, or is there a way forward that helps this retool/rebuild speed up a little bit?
Yeah, it's a great question, because that, I think, is the thing we need to be asking ourselves right now on a day-to-day with the Sabres. It's more of a big picture like that. And for me, I don't see how it doesn't start with a new general manager. Like, I don't know that they will do that, because they love Kevin Adams. He's worked in the organization for more than a decade. He's always been tight with Terry Pegula. So I guess I believe it when I see it that they'll move on from him. But I said the same thing about Don Granato last year, and they did move off Don Granato. Right. So I could be wrong on that. I think that's where it's got to start, though, is the owner needs to want to remove the current general manager and bring in a veteran, experienced guy that's done it. And those don't grow on trees. There's not a million of those out there. Like, I can mention Brian Burke. I know he's doing a lot of good work right now with the Women's Hockey League. But he's someone I just know off the top of my head's available. Someone like that has a built-in resume, that's built teams before. Like, I think that's where it has to start. And then you need that person to be very good at bringing in big talent. Like, if you want a real specific move, what they need to do is they need to go make the best offer on Elias Pettersson, and honestly, not care if he wants to come here. Like, sorry, you're the Buffalo Sabres. That's the only way you find your way to getting a star player. And he doesn't have any trade protection that kicks in until the summer. So I think, to me, for this GM, the best thing he could do is swallow hard, overpay, beat the market that 20 teams are going to be in on, and go trade for Elias Pettersson, and just cross your fingers that some big shakeup like that is going to happen. How confident I am going to do that, that they're going to do that, though? I wouldn't say I'm really that confident.
Understood. Joe, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Sure. You can follow me on Twitter or X at Sneaky Joe Sports. I'm on Blue Sky too at Sneaky Joe. And you can check out Locked On Sabres wherever you get this podcast, YouTube, and all the other audio platforms. You can find us there. All right, Joe. Thanks so much. Thanks, Gil. Thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen today. For your second listen, find Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Become a fantasy hockey expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from our hosts, Steele and Flip. Find Locked On Fantasy Hockey on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank my guest, Trevor Beggs of Locked On Canucks, Seth Toupal of Locked On Wild, and Joe DiBiase of Locked On Sabres for joining me today. I'm Gil Martin. I host the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, and I co-host the Friday edition along with Rachel Donner. Don't forget, we are here every day, Monday through Friday, bringing you the biggest stories from around the National Hockey League. Plus, we now have a special Saturday show on our Women's Hockey Spotlight with Erica El Ayala, so join us for that as well. Have a great day, everybody. Stay safe, and thanks for listening to and watching the Locked On NHL podcast.